Hello and welcome. Regardless of where you are when you're watching this video, you've probably heard of Volkswagen. But unless you're living here in China, you've probably never heard of, let alone seen, this Volkswagen, the Lamando L. That's right, this liftback sedan with a name like your favorite Star Wars character is only available here in the Chinese market. Today, we're going to give you a look at it.
With hands-on test drives and reviews of exciting Chinese market vehicles, Wheelsboy is the #1 source for China auto insights. Be sure to check us out on Instagram and Facebook. The Lamando L received a bit of attention from international media when it debuted, with some declaring it VW's best-looking design in years. I think if you covered up the logo, 9 out of 10 people wouldn't be able to guess the brand, and that 10th person, well, they probably work for Volkswagen.
The Lamando L clearly strikes a more dramatic pose than its predecessor, starting with this huge gaping maw down below. What surprised me, however, was up here with these headlights. They have a sleeker, less angular design than any I've ever seen on another Volkswagen. In between, we have a LED light bar with a light-up VW badge, obviously taking inspiration from VW's ID series.
The surprises continue when you come around to the side, where you are greeted by a heavily sculpted flank, pillarless doors, and a steeply raked roofline. The Peugeot-esque rear taillights are bisected by another light bar and illuminated logo.
The Lamando L is a true liftback, which means it has a huge rear opening and anywhere from 523 to 1,446 liters of cargo space, depending on whether you put those rear seats down. The interior equipment of the Lamando L will be very familiar to anyone who's ever been in a Mark 8 Golf. That includes the 2 TFT screens, the honestly pretty awful capacitive touch buttons everywhere, and the tiny little transmission knob. The design team at SAIC Volkswagen, that's the joint venture that produces this car here in China, they have chosen to forego a shroud over the instrument cluster. However, it does retain the kind of driver-focused or tilted center screen, giving it a kind of cockpit feel. Much has been made about how bad this generation of VW UI is compared to the competition, so I won't spend too much time on it. Suffice it to say, it's been kind of glitchy during my time with the car, completely turning the air conditioning off on its own at one point and having a hard time even figuring out where the car is when I'm using the GPS. The other thing that bothered me was this backup camera, which has decent clarity, but it's got a level of distortion that I haven't seen since like 2015. I'm not a huge fan of the hospital waiting room gray interior color that they've chosen, and there is plenty of cheap plastic to be found in this car. However, it is put together pretty well. It's priced between $22,500 US and $28,500 US here in the Chinese market. Our top spec model comes with a decent amount of equipment, including a sunroof, a Beats audio system, adaptive cruise control, a heads-up display, and heated and cooled front row seats.
As is usually the case, its Chinese competition is as well or even better equipped for thousands of dollars less, but the features gap isn't as large as we're used to seeing. Maybe the Lamando L will justify its premium once we get it on the road.
Before we do that, however, let's talk about the rear seats of the Lamando L. This car is larger than the previous generation Lamando. That includes an extra 17 centimeters of overall length and extra 7.5 centimeters of wheelbase. As such, rear legroom is appreciably larger than the last generation. Plenty for someone of my height, especially when the seat is adjusted for me as well. You also have 2 air vents, which is always nice, and 2 USB ports. So one is Type-C and one is a traditional USB port. The only thing I will say here is that rear headroom, mostly due to that nice sloping roofline, not particularly great. Anyone much taller than me at about 1.72 meters or about 5'9" is probably going to find themselves banging their head against the side of the car.
Under the hood of the Lamando L is the ubiquitous 1.4-liter TSI engine, making 110 kilowatts and 250 newton-meters of torque, or 150 horsepower and 183 pound-feet. That power goes through the equally ubiquitous 7-speed DCT, finally reaching the road via the front wheels. The official 0 to 100 time is a leisurely 8.9 seconds.
This thing doesn't just share most of its interior with the Mark 8 Golf, it also shares the MQB Evo platform. It is, however, larger in every dimension, including wheelbase. It won't surprise you then to learn that it drives like a larger, more comfortable Golf. The difference, I think, starts here in the steering, which is a little bit slower and not as communicative as it is in the Golf. In terms of speed, well, with only a 1.4 up front, you weren't expecting it to be very quick, and you would be right. It doesn't struggle in the city, but passing at highway speeds, yeah, that can be a bit of a problem. That might come off as a bit of a disappointment considering the sleek exterior design and somewhat driver-focused cockpit, but there is much to recommend about this car. I've enjoyed the nearly week that I've spent with it. I found it to be a refined, comfortable daily driver. This is due in part to the fact that all versions of the Lamando L come with a multi-link rear suspension as standard, as opposed to the Golf, where the cheaper, lower power versions come with a torsion beam rear. So does this car's driving experience justify its price premium over its local competition? I would say the answer is mostly yes. It's always interesting for me to jump into a car from a legacy automaker like Volkswagen because it reminds me of the individual strengths of these legacy makers versus the strengths of the more upstart Chinese brands. Speaking in generalities, of course, the legacy automakers like Volkswagen are better at the basics, things like the engine, transmission, and suspension tuning. The Chinese automakers, however, well, they have the lead when it comes to the more high-tech aspects, things like the adaptive cruise controller or the driver assistance systems. The one on this car simply isn't very good, not as good as the Chinese competition. The UI and center screen technology also better on Chinese cars in general. Those cars, however, don't have the refinement when it comes to the suspension, transmission, and engine tuning that this legacy car does, though. If you've driven other VW models, there's not much about this car that's going to surprise you. But with this nice new exterior design language, I think it's a good addition to the VW lineup here in China. All right, that's all for today's video. Thank you so much for watching. Be sure to check us out on Instagram and Facebook, links in the description below. And you can now check us out on our brand new website, wheelsboy.net. Not only can you see our videos, you can also read essays about each of the cars we review on the channel, and you can learn even more information about them.